The release of those torture memos. Newsweek's Michael Isikoff is with us, along with David Korn of Mother Jones Magazine and CQPolitics.com. Gentlemen, what do we make of this? Why did he put them out but not do anything about it? Michael.
There was a huge debate within the White House about this. Eric Holder, the Attorney General, had recommended releasing the memos. Basically, his people said there's no longer any reason to keep these memos classified. We're not using these enhanced interrogation techniques anymore. The argument had been all along.
Enhanced interrogation.
That's the phrase that's used. Right. But the argument had been all along, we can't tell the bad guys what we might do to them if we captured them, so therefore we had to keep it classified. But since we're not, under Obama's directive, we're not using the techniques anymore.
So we're not going to tell them we're going to put a bug in their coffin.
Right.
So you put a guy in a coffin, you scare him to death, you make him think about imminent death, and then you find out what his biggest phobia is, and you throw that into the coffin with him, right? Is that the strategy?
Yeah, like Winston Smith in 1984 and the rats, the cage with the rats. I mean, the ACLU had sued for these documents under the Freedom of Information Act, and some documents had come out already, and a lot of these details actually had been known. A lot of the, at least the.
But we knew about waterboarding.
Yeah, we knew about waterboarding and sleep deprivation. We knew about most of this. There are a few more details. The bugging, the use of insects, which they say in these memos actually never occurred. They set up guidelines for it, but then did not use the bugs. There are some new details here, but by and large, it just gives us, I think, a fuller picture of what I think is the big story, and that is the tortured legal reasoning that went into justifying these acts of torture or enhanced interrogation. Well, they kept saying again and again and again that with waterboarding, for instance, it's not prolonged harm. It only lasts for 40 seconds. What they do is they break down all these activities into really small, manageable parts. So what they're doing is
if you keep waterboarding a person and don't stop, you drown them, right?
Eventually you would. But here's an example of the torture legal reasoning in this. Let's look at the bugs in the coffin-like box.
Do you know what kind of bug it was? Is this a big, furry, scary 5-inch bug or insect or not?
You should raise it. They knew Zubaida had a fear of insects, but the torture law says you cannot inflict, you can't threaten a detainee with imminent death. Right. So if Zubaida thinks that a poisonous tarantula is in the coffin box with him and he's going to die, and he's told that, then you're committing torture, the Justice Department lawyer said. So how do you avoid that? You don't put a poisonous tarantula.
Don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah. You don't tell them what the bug is, and then you're not committing the predicate act of threatening him with imminent death.
At the same
you're just letting him think that he might die. You're just not telling him that he might die.
That's what waterboarding is too, really.
But at the same time, they're allowed to say to the detainees at the beginning of these procedures, we're going to do whatever it takes to get you to talk. Now, in that position, the threat of imminent death would seem to be
look, a common sense person would say, no matter, I mean, I'm talking about a middle-of-the-road person out there watching right now, would say, you can use a lot of this stuff if it's about a guy who knows there's another attack coming in the next 48 hours or whatever next week. Right. But to have it as a manual of arms, basically, to be used all over Abu Ghraib, all over Gitmo, to be sort of like the standard technique. I personally believe this mentality you're describing led to those people like Lindy English and all those people, the non-coms who got in trouble over at Abu Ghraib for stacking people up naked and manacling them together. That's all in this list of torture stuff. Take a look at this stuff. Slapping, nudity, sleep deprivation, confinement with an insect, waterboarding. The nudity part, apparently nudity with handcuffing to go with it. This is what these people got in trouble for.
I mean, the sleep deprivation, which is the beginning of the process, they say could go up for 180 hours, which is basically...
That's a week.
That's a week, 7.5 days. Yeah. And then you can give someone 8 hours of sleep and then start all over again. Then you can slap them, you can confine them
20 times.
You can confine them with insects. And
was a lot of this slapping so it wouldn't leave a mark? Yeah. Like, say, slapping on the stomach. I never heard of slapping on the stomach.
They have this device or this practice called walling, where they put you up against a flexible false wall.
New, actually. We didn't know.
How's that work?
And when they slam you against it, and the memo says it doesn't hurt, really, because they put a protective collar around you, but yet it shocks you. I want to see this demonstrated, not out of any...
Well, you won't, because the CIA destroyed the tapes of the interrogations of Abu Zubaida. But it's worth pointing out, David mentioned the legal reasoning, a couple things. There are a number of ongoing inquiries, one of which is a completed subpoenaed Office of Professional Responsibility report, ethics report within the Justice Department, looking at whether the Justice Department lawyers who wrote these memos violated their own, professional canons of ethics in using torture and slanted
apparently we got some information. I'm getting it from my ear. It was Lindy England, obviously. I forgot her name. It's not English. Lindy England was the woman who was charged and convicted of this. Kelly O'Donnell, one of our colleagues here at NBC, said it was a caterpillar. And I've heard this earlier today as well. Would a caterpillar scare somebody to death?
Well, they suggest in the memos that it might be a caterpillar. I don't think
but the point is they're not telling Zubaida it's a caterpillar. They're just letting. They're not telling Zubaida what it is.
Well, maybe not.
No.
It's a dark box. And you feel something on your leg.
Okay, so they dreamed this up, but they apparently hadn't used that technique yet when they put this report out. Let me ask you about this. Let's take a look at why some people didn't want this out. The Wall Street Journal today, CIA Director Michael Hayden and former Attorney General Mukasey, Michael Mukasey, wrote this: the release of these opinions was unnecessary as a legal matter and is unsound as a matter of policy. Its effect will be to invite the kind of institutional timidity and fear of recrimination that weakened intelligence gathering in the past and that we came sorely to regret on September 11th. There you have the threat.
Right.
That getting soft, in other words, not using these techniques, will expose us to attack.
This has happened.
This is coming from the two former top guys.
Every time in the last 30, 40 years there's been any investigation or any public disclosure of CIA or intelligence community activities that some people have deemed improper, you hear the same thing. This means that everyone will go soft inside the CIA, they'll quit, morale will go down.
Doesn't that charge make sense, though?
Well, listen, if they're...
Wouldn't you be afraid if you saw this stuff all over the paper, your kids are reading it, your family's reading it? Is this what you do, Daddy or Mommy?
Well, in fact, that's precisely the argument that Leon Panetta used to try to keep these memos under lid, which is that this will destroy the morale of the agency. A lot of the top people currently in the CIA were involved in aspects of this interrogation program. John Rizzo, the recipient of all 4 of these memos, he's still the top lawyer at the CIA. Right. Steve Kappas, deputy director of the CIA, number 2, was a top operations chief at the time that this interrogation program was put into place.
Let's talk blowback.
So there was a reason.
You know what blowback is?
Yeah, sure.
That's when something in an intelligence thing goes bad, and the people you like, the people we call the Mujahideen, we equipped them with stingers and everything. They turn into something different. It comes after us, Al Qaeda. What happens if one of the people we've tortured down there at Gitmo has a bad attitude about it afterwards and becomes one of the terrorists? Who gets blamed then?
Well,
he comes back at us and said, you guys screwed me. You guys tortured me for 3 or 4 years. I've got a new career plan.
Well, that's always the risk if you treat people poorly. I mean, at one point, Barry McCaffrey, a general, went down to Gitmo and said that it was his estimation that about only 1/3 of the people there deserved to be there, meaning that 2/3 didn't.
And those 2/3 are going to think like the other third when they get out, though.
All right, but to be fair, the guys we're talking about here are the high-value detainees. These guys aren't getting out under no circumstances. I mean, they'll either be tried or the
that's my question.
Justice Department will come up with a new legal theory
of the hundreds of people we've got in custody, in detention.
Yeah.
How many of them are going to be exposed to these techniques we're talking about? Slapping, nudity technique,
about
sleeping deprivation?
100 detainees who went through the CIA, up to 100 went through this program and were subjected to enhanced techniques.
And they were all high value that'll never get out.
No, they're not all high value, but they were all in the CIA detention program. About 3. Not about 3 were waterboarded.
The CIA when the president had to make the decision to release this under Freedom of Information, because the ACLU, and by the way, good credit to them for doing this, getting this out. Who wanted to keep it secret? Leon Panetta, the head of the CIA, former congressman.
John Brennan at the National Security Council, who was another former
So they were for
secrecy.
Who were the guys? Was it Greg Craig, I would bet, who's the president's counsel?
Greg and Eric Holder.
So they're Obama people.
Yeah. They didn't want to cover up for what had happened in the Justice Department beforehand. The people connected to the intelligence community, still working from the intelligence community, obviously had an interest.
But Panetta also wanted to keep it, didn't he?
Well, that's understandable. He's protecting his new truth. troops.
Oh.
Does he want these guys rebelling against him so early on in his
But what's really
tenure?
interesting is...
Well, what's the blowback going to be out of this whole thing? The fact that we all know this now. All the world now, everywhere in the world, our enemies now know how we torture, what we do. At every local paper.
But we're not doing it now.
No, but everybody knows what we've been doing.
Yeah.
They're not going to say that, by the way.
This
They're going to say what we do.
will add to pressure for more accountability on this issue. You got Leahy and
more
White
anger in the
House
Arab world.
For
more anger in the Arab Islamic world.
I mean, you could have that argument was used. I haven't seen it today.
Well, we'll see over the weekend.
Big,
the papers are still being printed over there in Egypt and elsewhere. Anyway, thank you, Michael Isikoff, sir, and thank you, David Coyne. You got to see this new movie, State of Play. I think you guys are in it. You are the Russell Crowe characters.